And I want, there are so many social issues that one could choose to focus on in Kentucky, in Louisville, in the nation, in the world. How did you choose advocacy? Because when I've read about you, you were an advocate early on for a living wage. You were with the Kentucky Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. You've worked with immigrants. And I really want to ask you about the immigrants thing too, in light of where we are now. And then you were on the Hate Crime Statistics Working Group. How did you choose those issues, or did those issues sort of choose you?
Well, they're all connected to race. And for most of the first 20 years, I was working directly in the West End. And for people who don't know, at that point, the West End was primarily populated by the African American community, and this church was a church that had been a traditionally white parish, and remained open and tried to do what we could to welcome anybody.
Was that St. Augustine's? Which one?
No, this is St. Charles.
St. Charles, okay.
And when the dome was built, it was dedicated to an African saint, St. Charles Lwanga, who's a man who lived at that time less than 100 years before in Uganda. And he and 20 some others had been martyred because the king of Uganda at that period had decided that Christians, or I don't know if he was Christian himself, but these were people that were in opposition to him, and so he had them.
That wasn't Idi Amin, was it?
Oh, no, it was way before, back in the late 1800s.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
Idi probably would have done the same thing,
Same thing, yeah.
being the nice guy that he was. So, but so the issues kind of came. The fair housing thing, I remember it was there was this, again, it was a not in my backyard backlash to some things, to having Section 8 housing put in different locations, which and not just all in one area and stuff like that. And the reaction to that was just dramatic on the part of some people. And, but that kind of not, I do have to raise the example of not in my backyard doesn't apply only to people who are outside traditionally. Jeff Ellis, I'm sure, Reverend Ellis, and he, who was this close friend of his, remember?
Ross Jessup?
Ross Jessup. Ross was an ex-offender, and they had this dream of putting a halfway house in the community at the old Flagey High School building. And the same thing that happened in Baltimore happened here. Some neighbors said, no, we don't want this here. This is a nice neighborhood, et cetera, and it is a nice neighborhood. The place, I lived at the other end of that block, So, again, we went out, educated the community, got the petitions and all this kind of stuff, but it took a long time to do all that. But we won the zoning case, and I will say this, one of the chief opponents, and I wish I could remember his name because I like to praise him. I think his name was Boylan, Mr. Boylan. He came to me later, we ran into each other, this was years later, and he said, I was wrong. He said, those guys made the best neighbors. And we tried to convince him, Ross, being an ex-offender, he says, we don't commit crime in our own nest. Says, or we take it outside. So, but they wouldn't believe that. But he did. He saw what happened, and the place was no longer vacant. It didn't have broken windows. It was well kept. The lawns were maintained, and the state ran out of money, is why it closed. But that was an interesting thing. That it's not that's not in my backyard thing. Is not limited to white people.
Right. It's just people who
Some of it's economic.
Yeah.
If you're a successful.
But some of it is also, don't you think, because people say,
fear.
Why does all of these things have to be located in our neighborhood?
Well, yeah.
Like if you say no in the East End, the West End gets everything.
Yeah. There is some of that.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.